Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined typically with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you out of our station in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned early on in the headlines, there's been this odd provocation that's been taking place between China and Taiwan. Basically, on Friday, China flew 38 military aircraft into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. And on the day after that, they sent 30 warplanes towards Taiwan. As you know, the United States has basically been bolstering Taiwan's military capabilities, despite the fact that China considers Taiwan part of China in this one China policy. This is creating a certain degree of friction that the U.S. State Department, Ned Price, has started to, let's say, bellyache about, to put it mildly, and has started to throw up all sorts of consternation. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Carl Jha. Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. Carl, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you for inviting me again.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you're an expert on this stuff, and we've always appreciated your insight into the issues pertaining to China in general. One of my subscribers sent me this over the weekend because he was very concerned that this could lead to a larger provocation. And the interesting thing, Daniel Ellsberg made the point. He's the one who released the Pentagon Papers. He noted that U.S. policy at the time was willing to basically go into a larger war over Taiwan. And Ellsberg's point in this was, you know, what is the military policy now? And how far would the United States go with this notion of trying to defend Taiwan? So from your take on this, what is going on that China is flying these airplanes or the warplanes towards Taiwan? And does this have anything to do with the U.S., I'm going to say provocation, by basically giving these guys weapons, despite the fact of the one China policy?
Okay, first, I want to get one thing clear, because in a lot of the news report, they cite Chinese military planes invading Taiwan airspace. So it gives people the impression that somehow Chinese fighter planes is flying over the city of Taipei. You know, people are looking up and they see Chinese fighter planes everywhere. That is not true. China is not flying over fighter jets over the island of Taiwan. It's flying over what Taiwan calls it's ADIZ, which is the Air Defense Identification Zone. Now, the Air Defense Identification Zone is something that's unilaterally declared by a country to supposedly safeguard its security. Now, none of these news reports about China supposedly invading Taiwan airspace shows you a map of the actual Taiwan ADIZ zone. So people can go to the Wikipedia, go to the entry for Air Defense Identification Zone. There's actually an entry for Taiwan. They have a map of the Taiwan ADIZ zone. And just will take one look, you will see how ridiculous this zone is being drawn. And half of it is literally over the mainland China provinces of Fujian and Zhejiang. I'm talking about not just over Taiwan Strait. It's over the space above the mainland China land, right? So and people are saying, wait a minute, you know, so what are they talking about in the news report? Again, the news report, they never show you a map or a flight path of these PLA fighter planes. But luckily for us, the Taiwan's Ministry of Defense, they have a verified Twitter account. And they tweet out every day the flight path of the PLA fighter planes into the so-called Taiwan ADIZ zone. And if I can even I can give you their Twitter handle so people can go see. It's the Taiwan Ministry of National Defense, ROC. It's at MON Defense. That is the official verified Twitter of Taiwan Ministry of Defense. And every day they plot out the map of the PLA aircraft over supposedly intrusion into Taiwan's ADIZ zone. And if you take a look at these maps, it's most of them shows that this flight path of the PLA military aircraft flies nowhere near the island of Taiwan. If anything, they fly closer to the coast of mainland China than the island of Taiwan itself. So let's just get that out of the way. China is not flying over fighter bomber jets directly over the island of Taiwan, not even close.
I'm glad that you explained that, because you're right. Oftentimes they don't necessarily get that across in regards to, okay. And what's funny too, the U.S. typically engage in, freedom of navigation exercises without any care or concern about the other countries that are involved. From your standpoint, though, I mean, you would agree that the number of flights have increased, though. I mean, whether it's over Taiwan or close to it. What's the reason for the escalation in the number of flights?
Right. So, and let's just give people a little bit of historical context, right? So up to 1960, I mean, in 1950s, Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek's KMT government used to fly its Air Force based in Taiwan to do bombing runs in Shanghai. That's 1950. It's because for longest time, the mainland China, they didn't have an Air Force that could answer the Air Force was built up in Taiwan with the help of U.S. military. That tip of balance only changed in 1960s after Soviet Union did a technology transfer to transfer the technology of MiG fighters to China. And since then, since 1960s, the balance had been shifting, and China still maintained an air superiority way into 1980s. But with the rise of China, that military balance have completely shifted. Now, if you look at the actual the flight path of the PLA military aircraft activity, it's a very careful. It's very carefully plotted. They made sure they went into the so-called Taiwan ADIZ zone, which is their way of telling Taiwan they think this ADIZ zone is BS. But then again, they intentionally plotted their flight path so a way it's kind of skirting around the edge. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's still close to those military aircraft runs. Still make them. It's still made close to the Chinese mainland coast. So in a way, it's not overly provocative, let's say, like flying directly over Taipei. At the same time, it's challenging the Taiwan's ADIZ zone, which is totally ridiculous in its scope. And at the same time, it's very careful not to appear too aggressive. Yeah. But of course, that's not what the narrative is being told in the U.S. media. U.S. media is pushing this narrative that large number of Chinese aircraft regularly violate Taiwan airspace. Now, this is kind of like I say, it's China's way of saying we do not respect this Taiwan so-called ADIZ, which is drawn totally ridiculous. At the same time, China is playing a very restrained game. Yeah. It's only skirting around the edge of these zones. It's not penetrating deep into Taiwan airspace. Like for example, do a run across the Taiwan island, which would be considered much more provocative and probably cause panic on the island. That's not the information we're getting from the U.S. media, first of all. But it is China's way of sending a message to show Taiwan's, look, we have the capability of doing so. Especially compared to the past, compared to 1950s when Taiwan regularly sends its aircraft to mainland and do bombing run. Again, this in 2021, these PLA aircrafts are not doing any bombing runs. Right. They're just flying around the edge of the Taiwan ADIZ zone to challenge it.
Basically, China's version of freedom of navigation, freedom of flight. In this case, this is Ned Price. Ned Price gave a statement because you're right. They're not necessarily disambiguating what is taking place. I mean, it comes across, if you just read the media or just hear it, it comes across as if, oh, these guys are just overflying Taiwan. This is so provocative, etc. The United States is very concerned about the People's Republic of China's provocative military activity near Taiwan, which is destabilizing, risks miscalculation, and undermines regional peace and stability. We urge Beijing to cease its military, diplomatic, and economic pressure and coercion, I love that one, against Taiwan. This was Ned Price, State Department spokesman. What's your comments to that? I mean, some of this stuff is pretty rich. And radically hypocritical when you hear the United States says this. I mean, if you look at the way we treated Venezuela, if you look at the way we treated Iran, I mean, coercion and bellicosity is an understatement in this case. The key difference here is China doesn't consider Taiwan a separate entity, correct?
Well, neither does United States recognize Taiwan as a separate country because U.S. does not have an official embassy in Taipei. As most of the country in the world, there's only a handful of the country in the world, mostly countries in Africa and Latin America, because Taiwan give them generous loans and grants and then lots of money basically to pay them to recognize Taiwan diplomatically. But United States or none of its major Western allies recognize Taiwan as an independent country, because none of them maintain a official embassy in Taipei. And again, this is so from China's and U.S. actually made a joint communique with China in 1970s when after Nixon visited China to recognize, the PRC's claim to be the sole legitimate government of China, which basically, negates Chiang Kai-shek's claim, a similar claim in Taiwan, and at the same time. U.S. was trying to maintain, for a long time, U.S. trying to maintain the so-called the strategic ambiguity, because at the same time that the U.S. upholds its one China policy, U.S. is also, Congress also passed the Taiwan Relationship Act, which supposedly pledged U.S. aid to Taiwan's defense. And that enables the U.S. military industrial complex to keep on selling Taiwan very expensive military gadgets over the years. And the statement about provocation is rich, especially coming from the United States, because the PRC foreign policy of PRC foreign ministry can literally just change the words around and replace China with U.S. and Taiwan with South China Sea, to talk about the U.S. freedom of navigation. It's the same. It's very provocative to send all this military hardware into proximity of China and to actually escalate a chance of miscalculation and possibly conflict.
I mean, not to mention AUKUS, that deal that came forward, even the assistance on Japan, like putting all of those missiles and weapons on Japan. I'm curious, when did this start? Because as you noted before, this kind of strategic ambiguity, or for that matter, this kind of one China policy that the United States, for the longest time, apparently, at the very least, accepted, even if it was selling Taiwan weaponry, it's still on some level, it's like making contacts to Taiwan was kind of off the reservation. The reason I ask this is because when Trump got in office and Trump called Taiwan, it was seen as a massive jump of the shark. But since then, the policy seemed to have gotten that much more, let's say, normalized. Is Trump, or was Trump the first, I guess, demarcation point from the one China policy? Or was there something going on prior to Trump taking office? Is this kind of the Asian pivot?
So the strategic ambiguity was a longstanding tradition in U.S. since 1972, since the Nixon visit to China. What have changed under Trump is, immediately after he take office, he made a call to the Taiwanese leader, Tsai Ing-wen. And that is a big break in the protocol. Again, U.S. State Department at some point had to come out and saying, it's not making any dramatic change to the one China policy. But then again, Trump sent its health czar to Taiwan to ostensibly talking about Taiwan's entry into WTO, not the WTO, I'm sorry, WHO, right? And this is also seen by China as U.S. trying to find a creeping way of granting Taiwan international recognition. And as you mentioned, Biden, since assuming office, hasn't really stepped back from all the Trump rhetoric and Trump stance. I mean, the only thing we have seen so far is the most recent release of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou by Canada after U.S. Justice Department decide to forego the case. I mean, maybe we're seeing some effort of trying to cool off the U.S.-China tension. I mean, hopefully that's an encouraging sign. But at the same time, not great deal has moved since the Trump went fully hardline anti-China. And hopefully, I'm hoping, but what Biden is trying to do is trying to use the Trump stance as a negotiation chip to try to wrangle more concession from China before fully normalize relationship again. I'm hoping, but we know that U.S. military-industrial complex has a lot of inertia, and I don't really know if Biden can really, put that under his control. So at this point, we can all hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And I think so. At this point, it's still a lot of war of words. Right, it's the U.S. accusation. Even though they fully understand what is actually going on, they are fully engaged in this war of rhetorics, and again, still continue the posture of sending aircraft carrier groups into South China Sea and surrounding regions to maintaining the pressure on China.
Are you concerned?
I think.
Well, I was just going to ask: are you concerned with an escalation to this? I mean, and I guess that question goes in two fronts. Are you concerned that the U.S. gets further involved? Meaning, if they're like right now we're sending weapons and we're kind of doing this kind of war word stuff. Are you concerned with a further escalation either from the standpoint of China or from the standpoint of the U.S. getting further involved in Taiwan after, I guess, the flights?
Right. I think it's I don't foresee immediate escalation, but we haven't really backed down from this path of escalation. I don't think either side, China or U.S., are actively planning or intentionally get into an armed conflict. But the fear is that unplanned accident could happen when you have all these military hardware in close proximity to each other. One missile misfiring could potentially touch off the World War III. Right. And that is something that's very dangerous. And I don't see, at least nobody is talking publicly about what is a path of de-escalation. There's a lot of talking about path to escalation. In fact, 60 Minutes Australia just a couple of weeks ago came out with a special on war with China, talking about what Australia should do in case of a war between U.S. and China over Taiwan specifically. And in a way, I can't help but to think this is a way of preparing the Western public to psychologically for a possible, scenario of war with China over Taiwan. But I'm hoping I'm wrong, but it is worrying.
Do you think the United States would get involved in order to defend Taiwan? I mean, I know Ellsberg kind of made mention that nuclear war, or at the very least this kind of nuclear deterrent in protection of Taiwan, but this was back, I believe, in the 60s or something to that effect. What about now? Do you think that the U.S. would really, I don't want to say instigate, but do you think they would come to Taiwan's assistance if indeed there was a larger provocation where China, or let's say some red line was crossed? And maybe this is two questions. What is a red line on Taiwan for China? That's the first point.
Great question. I mean, the whole point of U.S. strategic ambiguity is not to answer that question explicitly, right? And so to U.S. like to keep its option open, but at the same time, U.S. is flexing its muscles around the Chinese coast to show that it has capability of intervening. Whether the U.S. has a will to intervene, I think that's a completely another question. I mean, U.S. especially when most of the U.S. public can't tell the difference between Taiwan and Thailand. I know that's true because I live in U.S. for 30 years, and that's my experience. And U.S. will, well, then again, U.S. government has been able to sell war, over Libya and and Iraq and Afghanistan to its public with no problem. But China is much, much, much larger than Iraq or Afghanistan, and China has nuclear weapons. The difference between 1960s is China exploded its first nuclear device in 1964, and it hasn't looked back. So China, at this current stage, has the capability of striking mainland U.S., and it has enough nuclear warheads to survive the first strike and to do a retaliation strike against U.S. So, again, the question is, what is U.S. willing to sacrifice to keep Taiwan from China, to keep Taiwan from mainland China control? And again, this, I need to stress, nobody's talking about the path of de-escalation. There's a lot of talk about path of escalation. If China does this, if China wipe out a U.S. aircraft carrier group, maybe we should get to use lob or tactical nuclear weapons. But nobody's answered the question, what happens if we use tactical nuclear weapons in, either against a target around China or in China? What if China do a retaliatory nuclear strike? Then what happens? Then nobody is answering that question, and nobody is even talking about a plan of de-escalation. So right now they're playing a game of chicken, right? And they're playing game of nuclear chicken right now. That's what's happening.
That's so disturbing. I mean, because you make a really good point. Is the United States willing to lose, 10 million people in defense of Taiwan? That's not really asked. That's not really asked at all. In fact, maybe that should be asked in this case. From China's point of view, what is the red line in regards to the U.S. working with Taiwan? I mean, because I would imagine there has to be at some point, meaning there has to be something that takes place where China says, yeah, this is a no, and this is a hard no, and we will take action the moment that this line is crossed. What would that be in relation to either the U.S. Army Taiwan or the U.S. assistance to Taiwan?
Well, from China's point of view, China has been very clear from the beginning. If any government on Taiwan officially declares independence, that would be the red line crossed, because as China has lived with a status quo with Taiwan for over 70 years, and right now, time is on China's side, because as each year pass, China is growing stronger economically and militarily. So the balance is tipping in China's favor. I don't want to be cliche, but in the art of war, Sun Tzu said the best way to win a war is without a battle. Right now, China is winning the war without a battle. It's growing stronger and stronger. There is a fear, there is urgency on the U.S. side, though, because many national security establishment folks in U.S. recognize that fact. And they recognize they have a very limited time window in which U.S. can do anything to confront China. And they believe that that time window is in next between 5 to 10 years. And there is a fear that some people in the military-industrial complex decided that U.S. need to act within that window to put a stop to China's rise and use Taiwan as a trigger point, and that then we're going to be in very, very dangerous waters. But from China's perspective, the red line has always been if the government on Taiwan declare independence, right? And that again, Taiwan is not a fully sovereign country in the way that any government in Taiwan would never do something like declaring independence without explicit support from the United States. So U.S. plays a very important role here. So if U.S. decide to tell Taiwan, hey, go ahead and declare independence, we'll back you up 100%. And then if the Taiwan government went ahead and declared independence, that would be the red line.
But they know what that would mean. I mean, like, that's pretty significant. I'm curious, from your standpoint, just from your own take on this, at what point is a country independent? And I'm fascinated by this question. And it's not just with Taiwan. I mean, even going with Nagorno-Karabakh, for example, between, when that conflict was taking place and, these guys wanted to have a certain level of independence associated with it. There seems to be all sorts of provocations around the world on countries who want to be separate and distinct from, let's say, a larger country. At what point should that take place? I mean, is Taiwan sufficiently different, be it culturally, be it, tenor, that it could be its own independent country? Meaning, what's go for it, please.
The question really is, why is this an issue on Taiwan? And the answer is domestic politics, because Taiwan, for many years, have been ruled by KMT, which was the party that lost out in the Chinese Civil War and fled mainland and ran to Taiwan. And you ruled in Taiwan as a military dictatorship for many years. And the current reigning party, the DPP, came to power after they defeated KMT in election. For DPP, they need to present China as a great other. The ones that send these KMT soldiers come over to rule over Taiwan for many decades. But again, even as an election domestic issue, even when DPP came to power in Taiwan, this is not the first time that DPP assumed the office of presidency in Taiwan. They have done actually very little to actually move toward independence because, again, like you said, they understand what that means. The rhetorics of declaring independence and getting the Taiwan international recognition is very important for Taiwan domestic election issues, but that's where it stops because they also all understand what it means if Taiwan actually goes ahead and declare independence, that would violate the red line declared by PRC government. So what we have seen is that they play this word game. For example, both DPP and KMT on Taiwan, both parties claim that Taiwan it's already independent. It's Republic of China on Taiwan. It's the current. They don't have to change anything because it's an independent country because they are running. They have their own military. They have their own. They're holding elections. They have own government structure, et cetera, so they don't have to go officially declare independence because ROC already exists. So that's a way of justifying the status quo because and again to the domestic politics in Taiwan, there's a divide between the KMT and their supporters, especially a lot of the mainlanders who came with the KMT after 1949, after the KMT lost Civil War, and the so-called Bensen or the Taiwan provincials who were already on the island before 1949. So DPP plays that the identity politics and that is just politics.
Yeah.
Again, like the Taiwan current status quo, it has been going on for 70 some odd years, and as long as Taiwan don't unilaterally declare independence, make an official statement, I don't foresee any immediate military action from PRC.
I see.
But if they do, then yeah, all bets are off.
That would basically be the red line that they cross over, and China would take more aggressive action or provocative action in order to bring them into the fold. Very interesting. Carl, thank you, man. I really appreciate this. Carl Jha is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter @Carl Jha, follow the podcast on Twitter @SteelSilkN, and subscribe to support his podcast on patreon.com/Silk and Steel. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We will be back in a moment. Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left and only corner this morning, I'm your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas. And that means you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Alrighty, very interesting conversation with Carl. Carl knows his stuff on China. And when this was coming out over the weekend, the first question was, okay, how bad is this actually? And what is basically taking place? And Carl is able to give all sorts of background detail and kind of give the reality of the politics in the region. So shout out to Carl Jha. Thank you for the short notice visit.